5 adopted children were found to be in awful conditions. Now, this is much deeper than just a case of evil parents, and I hope that I can help in the overall realization of that while also acknowledging the horror and the trauma that these children who became survivors endured. I have been following this trial that has recently concluded, and I knew that I needed to bring it to you with the insights that I have into this world that is often silenced. You are such a genuine gem. Thank you for clicking on my video. I am Brooke Makenna. This is a case that is going to be hard to listen to, but I believe that it is well worth it to hear what is happening. But before we dive into that, I want to thank today's sponsor, Bombas. Now, that Bombas is a brand that we all love. They started when the founders learned of the need for socks for homeless shelters. They began creating these insanely soft socks that have no toe seams, and so if you have sensory issues like me, you don't have to worry about that at all. They're so soft, so thick, great material, and they have socks for every occasion. They even have 100% happiness guarantee for free returns and exchanges, and they have already donated 150 million clothing items to those in need. They have a mission of 1 purchase equals 1 donation. And don't get me started on their Sherpa slippers that I have. I wear them anytime that I am home, not only to keep me warm, but also because they have a plush memory foam support at the bottom. And Bombas is giving new customers 20% off their first purchase. Just go to bombas.com/Brooke and use code Brooke20 for 20% off. And they now offer international shipping to over 200 countries. So no matter where you are, you can feel good and do good. Now let's get back to the story. So a 911 call came in to the Kanawha County Sheriff's Office in Sissonville, West Virginia. This was in October of 2023, and a man claimed that he was very concerned about the kids of one of his neighbors. He would state that he had reported this family multiple times and knew that the kids were being locked in an outhouse.
But there is a family that we have been calling CPS on multiple times. He has 2 kids locked in an outbuilding. They've been in there for days. They're in that with the red door. It's padlocked. Locked with a padlock? Yes, I've seen him open it, say something to the kids, and I watched him lock it back. The kids are locked in there. You can't miss it. It's a red, 2 double doors. They're red. They're locked in that, in the barn.
Now, investigators arrived later that day on October 2nd, 2023, around 5:45 in the afternoon. They pulled up to the 200th block of Cheyenne Lane and immediately saw a barn on the property where there was also a main residence. But this barn is where these kids were allegedly being kept. So they went to this barn and they found a padlock was on the outside of the doors. So investigators proceeded to actually break into this barn. And inside they would find a 20 by 14-foot room with 2 teens. Now, this was a 16-year-old female and a 14-year-old male, and they would allegedly tell the police that they had no way to exit the shed on their own. The 16-year-old stated that this was a common occurrence for them being in the shed. They were not allowed to go outside at all. They had been given food around 6 a.m. that morning, but they had been in the barn ever since. Now, deputies found that there were no adults present in that barn or in the main residence or on the property at all at this time. And on the criminal complaint that was filed by Deputy H.K. Burdett, she would describe that she was knocking on the shed door and the girl was inside, indicating that she could not open it on her own. This shed was described as having no access to food or water or a proper place to use the bathroom. There was like an RV toilet with a black tarp on the ground, but it was not functional. The shed had no windows, no beds. Now, there was also a camera in the corner of the shed that appeared to be working. The complaint stated that these teens obviously did not have access to proper health care and hygienic care because they were wearing dirty clothes and it smelled horrid. In fact, the 14-year-old wasn't even wearing shoes and appeared to have sores on his feet. However, these 2 teens were not the only children located on the property. When the deputies made their way to the main residence on the property, they would look into the windows and find a small child who they believed to be around 5 or 6 years old, crying and sitting on the floor in a loft that was higher than the rest of the room. They were eerily close to a 15-foot drop, and so they forced entry, worried that this child was going to fall and harm themselves. Again, inside they found no presence of parents or guardians, and so the deputies tried to make contact with the family members and they were unable to reach them at this point. It wouldn't be until hours later, around 8:30 to 9:45 p.m. that the parents would arrive, and they would be identified as 63-year-old Donald Ray Lantz and 61-year-old Jeanne K. Whitefeather. they had one of their children with them. And deputies learned that they also had a fifth child, a 6-year-old, who was with acquaintances of the family whom they met at church. So she wasn't on the residence or with them at that time. These were the adoptive parents of 5 black children who had ranged from 5 to 16 at that time and were all biological siblings. When asked why the children were locked in this shed, the father Donald stated that they liked it. They were then both arrested on felony charges of gross child neglect. And it had been found that they had adopted these 5 children when they were living back in Minnesota in 2018. They then moved to Tongassett, Washington in 2019, and they lived on a ranch called the Big Rock Ranch in a small rural town. A real estate agent turned friend when they lived in Washington claimed that the children were all from Chicago and they were a big family unit. These siblings were very close, although they did often fight, so CPS wanted to keep them all together. So Jeanne and Donald elected to adopt all 5 of them. They even built an extension onto the Washington ranch to be used as a makeshift homeschool. Then they moved to West Virginia in 2023 and were still homeschooling the 5 children, but since being in West Virginia, 2 complaints had been made about them. One was back in May of 2023 and another in September of 2023. Both times, deputies had been sent out to the home and found no evidence of wrongdoing. So these adoptive parents, Donald and Jeanne, had no prior criminal records, only reports with the police as well as CPS, but no official charges. But there were concerns of abuse reported in Washington when they lived there back in October 2022 to April 2023 before they ended up moving to West Virginia. Now, at this point, when these parents were arrested, their bond was set at $200,000 and they were forced to have no contact with the 3 children that were found in the shed and left alone in the main residence, and all 5 of their children were placed back into foster care. Now, during a bond hearing, Donald's brother would testify that he would often go to their home and he would have these surprise visits that he would just drop by the family home and that nothing seemed out of the ordinary, that his brother and his wife loved those children. He also stated that the home and the shed were a bit unfurnished because the family was in the process of moving to a larger home. The parents' attorney, who was Mark Plants, then described the shed as a teenage hangout. He said that the parents would often call it this as well as the kids, and that there was a key inside the shed that they had access to. He stated that this was just a plain and simple misunderstanding about what was going on here. Donald's brother then posted their bond about 3 days later. Around 5 months later, in February of 2024, a judge ruled that CPS failed to adequately investigate what was happening to these children who were left to suffer at the hands of their adoptive parents for months. CPS was actually ordered to provide information in this case as part of an ongoing class action lawsuit in West Virginia, which accuses the state of failing to protect children and fix its overwhelmed foster system. This had actually first been filed back in 2019 on behalf of dozens of children in foster care, and authorities were suing the state, and they claimed that nothing had changed in those 5 years it had taken to put this case together. So a trial date for that case was actually set for March 2025. But back to this couple's arrest for the alleged of their adoptive children. In May of 2024, a grand jury indicted this couple, and the judge claimed that she had never seen an indictment like this in all of her time. It was alleged that the children were targeted because of their race and basically used as for forced labor. By June, Donald and Jeanne were arraigned on 16 counts each, accusing them of civil rights violations, human forced labor, gross child neglect, and falsifying an application seeking a public defender. All but one of those counts were felonies. These charges were for 4 out of their 5 children, with a judge claiming that they used them as slaves. They were white parents with black children, and that these parents forced, threatened, and interfered with the free exercise and enjoyment of any right and privilege of the 4 children. You see, we spoke a little bit about how back in Washington there were reports against them, and it was found that in Washington, the CPS had been investigating them prior to their move to West Virginia. They had actually moved across the country to escape these claims. It had started back in 2020 when Jeanne, the mother, had called 911 saying that her elderly mother was having an emotional breakdown while performing some chores. And then on July 4th of 2022, Donald would call and report that his daughter had run away because she didn't want to be grounded. Donald said that his daughter didn't know anyone there and was afraid of the dark and probably hiding. She was actually found the next day. But then on November 1st of 2022, police were called to the local hospital where the eldest adopted son was having a meltdown. Officers saw the father Donald pinning him to the ground after he was freaking out, and 2 days later, the eldest son accused the parents of telling the hospital staff that he was often locked in his bedroom with a bucket to use as a bathroom. He also said that his parents were physically abusing his sister as well. Now, even though the son made these claims and was showing evidence of a mental break, he was discharged and sent back home to his family due to the lack of beds in the psychiatric facilities. Now, this prompted a CPS referral where a social worker was sent out to their home, and Jeanne told the worker that this eldest son had mental issues that were getting worse with puberty, but he was receiving therapy. She said that her other children were scared of him coming home due to his behaviors, and this led many to connect this eldest boy to having possibly reactive attachment disorder, which is very common in foster and adoptive children and can lead to violent outbursts that are very uncontrollable for the average family to deal with without proper medical care. A month later, this same boy ran away and he called the police claiming that he had been grounded for speaking back to his mother, and he got into a fist fight with his dad as well. He said around this time his mother waved a him when he tried to leave his room. He told the officers he wanted to increase his medication, and when the deputy at the time wrote that he didn't suspect any mental health issues for this boy and found him to be mentally competent. But the neighbors who spoke to this boy claimed that he wanted to get the demons out of his mother and believed that demons could change them into animals, and the fact that he was changing into a lion. So when the deputy who was investigating this case called a CPS investigator, they claimed that this boy was known to have hallucinations, and they were in the process of assessing whether this boy needed to go into Child Protective Services. The father Donald then spoke to the deputy and confided in him that this eldest boy had assaulted his wife and the other children, and they were all afraid of him returning home. That he was actually living in a detached part from the main residence to protect the rest of this family. So Washington CPS had threatened to remove their oldest son from their home and had been in the process of investigating but didn't have enough evidence. There were said to be about 6 police reports about this family, about the children moving away and the child being forced to stay in his room, and there was also one about a bullwhip being used as punishment, but this boy did admit to attacking his mother with a piece of wood. Again, that real estate agent turned friend who knew this family in Washington claimed that Jeanne wanted to get help for this boy's mental illness and they weren't getting it, and so she was fearful that the CPS was going to take him away, and she did not believe that was the best thing for him. So when the deputy in Washington who had dealt with this family heard of the charges in West Virginia, he said that he was shocked that this family was on their radar, but not at the level that they were arrested for. He also claimed that they never got a call from the authorities in West Virginia about what they had experienced with the family at all. Now, the trial was postponed after the prosecutor, Chris Krivenak, asked for the children to undergo psychiatric testing to determine whether they were psychologically competent to stand trial as witnesses. One of the children had been placed in a secure mental health facility since the time of the arrest. This was that eldest boy. He was found to be in a state where he needed to be held in a psychiatric center. But the prosecutor said that he did not want to further harm these children who had already suffered, and he had already spoken to 3 who were in foster care, but he wanted to talk to the one who was in the facility. However, Judge Mary Claire Akers denied this and scheduled the trial for January 2025. Both were pleading not guilty, and the only charges that were different was the fact that Jeanne was accused of spraying and exposing the children to bear spray and repellent, and Donald was accused of striking a child. However, they would be tried together. So the trial began on January 14th, and the prosecution stated that the evidence would show that the couple forced the children to work and abused them physically, emotionally, and mentally so that they would comply. That they were forced to endure inappropriate farm labor and physical and mental and they had cattle whips and bear spray used on them. That 2 of the 5 children had tried to run away, and that the couple's actions were about control and not about discipline. Now, the defense, on the other hand, stated that this was about adoptive parents struggling to deal with their children's past trauma and severe mental illnesses. That these 4 children had suffered at the hands of their biological mother prior from being taken from her, including her drinking and using drugs while pregnant with them, and the fact that the eldest son displayed signs of schizophrenia, hallucinations, and combative behavior towards the other children, his siblings, and his parents. In fact, the defense revealed that when Jeanne and Donald adopted the children back in Minnesota, the judge, attorneys, and the temporary guardian, or the foster mother of these children, had advised the couple to keep cameras on them at all times in order to keep them safe from the oldest son. The attorney for these parents claimed that the eldest son's mental health condition continued to get worse with puberty and that he would show violent behavior towards his family. He attempted to run away and was hospitalized a few times before being released back to his family, and when his family moved to West Virginia, the 2 oldest children decided to move into the shed because they wanted space. The attorney said that all of the children slept on mattresses and the door was initially not locked. But the oldest son started showing concerning behavior, and the parents had called CPS for help and they never heard back, so that's when they installed the lock on the door. The defense also stated that CPS had shown up to their home 2 times prior to this. All of the children were interviewed separately, and none of them claimed racism or that there were also no signs of physical injury to the children, and that the only reason that there was nothing in the shed when officers arrived in October was that they were moving into another home.
They think that conduct in Washington during that 6 or 7 years is intrinsic to their case, and I agree with them. On the other side of that is my client's conduct in response to that is highly relevant and highly probative.
What they're doing is they're trying to take things from these records in Washington to fit their narrative.
Now, this is when a West Virginia neighbor named Joyce Bailey would testify that she had witnessed some of the labor that the children were forced to do. She would get emotional while stating that she saw the kids lined up in the rain, moving heavy objects when they were moving into the home, and she witnessed them having difficulty carrying these things, such as fencing for animals, propane tanks, full buckets of water from the trailer to the barn to the home. And she saw the eldest boy carrying a propane tank, and he could barely walk. He was acting like he had sores on his feet, and he was dragging the tanks behind him.
I was afraid that they would move away and those little kids, nobody would be there to help them.
She said that Donald was just standing there not helping the kids, and that she never saw the kids go outside to play or talk to each other, that they were always just working. She even filmed a video which was shown by the court, and she was saying that it tore her up to watch it. Her husband told her she should stop filming, and she said she didn't care. And by that October, the month of the arrest, Joyce stated that she had witnessed Donald locking the kids in the shed and leaving the property. She was also there when the deputies arrived to rescue the children. Another neighbor, Stacy Miller, would testify that the kids' behavior is what caught her attention. That when they were working outside, they were always wearing the same clothes every day. They would all stand in a line with their heads tucked down and would be carrying these heavy items. The third witness was actually Stacy's husband, Eric, who claimed that he confronted Donald after his wife began telling him what she had seen. He was asking Donald why the kids were standing in line and not playing, and Donald said they play all the time. But Eric said that he knew that they didn't, and he hadn't seen them play since they moved in, and Donald just didn't even respond to him. And yet another neighbor also witnessed strange behavior at this home. Jeremy Reed said that he actually recorded Donald going over to the shed, fumbling with the lock, leading 3 kids in, and then he left alone. He said he never saw the parents carrying anything, and it was always the kids. And then another witness named Candace Hilbert, who babysat for the first witness, Joyce Bailey's kids, she was there often, so she saw these things too, and she stated that she would watch Donald snapping his fingers and pointing at the kids, and they seemed to understand where to go and what to do without him even needing to say anything to them. On January 15th, the second day of trial, Detective Ann Pyle would testify that she had reviewed thousands of surveillance videos from the cameras in the shed, as well as in the bedroom of the younger kids. She showed the jury videos from September 18th to 19th, 2023, before their arrests. She said that the kids never left the barn other than one time a week, and they would sleep in a sleeping bag on the concrete floor or with a piece of cardboard under their heads and a fitted sheet to cover them up. However, in the footage of the main residence in the bedroom of the youngest children, who were said to be 9 and 11, she observed the children standing for hours, and then they would go to sleep on the floor without beds. They appeared to never change clothes, and she said she found that the 16-year-old in the barn appeared to be a babysitter of sorts for that 14-year-old boy.
And I received 5 or 6 days worth of footage that covers them in that room, and the only time I observed one of them step out of that room, other than that, they never left that room as far as the video showed.
Deputy Hannah Barrett then testified as the first officer to respond that day, and she claimed when she arrived, she knocked many times on the shed doors and nobody answered, but she heard people inside. She told them that they were not in trouble, that the police just wanted to make sure that they were okay. And that is when one of the children answered that they couldn't open the door from the inside. That's when the police broke in, and Burdett remembered the wave of heat and strong body odor that hit them when the door opened. Though Deputy Burdett would testify that a key was actually found inside on top of the cabinet for this shed. She would then confirm that they went on to rescue the third child from the main residence, who they believed to be 5 or 6, but actually turned out to be a 9-year-old. Detective Robert Alford would testify that he was called to the scene, and that is when the 2 children were found in the shed. They had to use a sledgehammer to break the lock, and inside he would photograph the shed with the concrete floors, the plywood walls, the unplugged AC unit, metal chairs, a small table, and a camper toilet. He testified that the girl in the shed was talkative. She was happy to get out of there, but the boy was looking down and not talking at all. And that's when they found the third child in the main residence. That was around the same time that the father, Donald, actually showed up to the home. Now, he allegedly gave the officers a set of keys, but none of them worked for the main residence. So they ended up forcing entry, found the 9-year-old. She was crying, she was scared, she was distraught, and she was mute. And so Detective Alford said that Donald was asking them why they were at the home. He was very confused, and Jeanne would arrive later on, and she was also confused, and her cell phone was confiscated from her at this point. On January 16th, the third day of trial, more surveillance footage was shown to the court. The first was the day of the arrest, which showed that morning, the children, 2 in the shed, 2 in the upstairs bedroom in the main residence, they were doing their daily routine of standing, eating, and using the bathroom. And by the evening, the cameras showed the officers breaking into the shed. This showed the children remaining quiet until the sheriff told them that they were not in trouble.
That the children in both rooms slept on the floor. The 2 in the barn area slept on the concrete floor with sleeping on a sleeping bag on the concrete floor, and slept with nothing underneath him other than a piece of cardboard under his head, and had a fitted sheet that he would cover up with. And in the bedroom upstairs, they would sleep on that plastic that I had mentioned, but they did have some blankets that they would cover up with.
The next surveillance footage tape was from the next day when Detectives Pyle and Alford were in the shed collecting evidence. But the defense began to question them on this footage, saying that there were several hours of videos missing and that the cameras were motion activated and seemed to have a delay that were not showing everything. Detective Piles agreed that there were delays in the videos and that in the prior surveillance footage it actually showed Donald leaving the shed when it hadn't previously shown him even entering the shed. Detective Piles was also asked when she first heard about the investigation into this family after the CPS visits. She said that it was mid-August and there were attempts to get a hold of a CPS worker. There was contact made once, but then there was no further coordination between CPS and the police to actually go and visit the family. The defense would also ask Pyle if she had seen Donald threaten or harm the children in the footage, and she responded no. She was asked if Donald brought them food and water. She responded yes.
There was a contact made with a worker once, but there was no further contact to coordinate going and making a visit to the residence together.
The prosecution then asked Detective Pyle the behavior of the girl towards the boy in the shed, and Pyle claimed that it seemed that the girl was in charge of the boy, making sure that he was doing what he was supposed to be doing. She coordinated when they ate, when they used the bathroom, and when they went to bed. She was also asked if anyone had referred to the shed as the school room, and she said yes, that some of them did. But she was asked if there was any school books or materials found inside the shed, and she said no. She also claimed there was no toys in any of the younger children's rooms either. And that is when the digital forensic examiner, Jared Payne, was called to the stand, and he spoke about his part in the investigation. He claimed that 2 days after the arrest on October 4th, he had been given Jeanne's phone. He then gave this information to the West Virginia Fusion Center for analysis. And then on January 17th, the fourth day of trial, 2 forensic experts from that center took the stand. Jacob Hewitt would reveal text messages that was found on these couples' phones to each other. Back in June of 2023, the word monkey was used to refer to these children. It stated, "Your 2 monkeys are so effed up. Next time I will pay you to take 4 of them," with a smiling, laughing emoji. A video was then also found of Donald one of the children with an HVC pipe and shouting profanities while Jeanne laughed. Another employee testified that the couple was receiving checks from the government for the children for adoption assistance totaling $300,000. But this is when things got really heartbreaking because the children would begin to testify. The 16-year-old girl who had been found in the shed was now 18, and she would claim that she and her siblings had a difficult life after adoption. She said that they were meant to stand in their rooms for hours to prevent them from falling asleep, and they were told to keep their hands on their heads. They had pepper spray used on them if they didn't, and she would claim that they would do that all day before going to sleep and doing it again the next. This 18-year-old said that they were cursed at all the time. They were fed peanut butter sandwiches and not allowed to eat at other times. And she said they went about 2 months without showering or brushing their teeth. This 18-year-old would say that Donald will give them food and then their daily chores, but most of those occurred in Washington, where they would live in these tents on the ranch and use portable toilets and clean themselves with disposable wipes. However, once they got to West Virginia, they began to live in a van before the police were actually called, and that is when they were moved inside and rarely let out. The 18-year-old said that Jeanne, the mother, was rarely saying anything to her by then, but the 18-year-old survivor said that if that door would have been left open in the shed, she would not have run away because she would be afraid of her siblings bearing the punishment of her leaving. She said that she had been one to try to run away in Washington, and that in West Virginia, Jeanne put up cameras because she said she didn't trust them because of that and told them to stop being stupid. The 18-year-old claimed that Mother Jeanne would tell them that they were dirty, that they stunk, and that she wouldn't even use the same dishes as these children. She would tell them that she just wanted the youngest girl and wished for a life without the rest of them, that they would never amount to anything. Now, the 18-year-old said that when CPS would come, they wouldn't tell the truth because Donald could hear them. She said that her and her brother had been in that shed continuously for 2 months prior to being found, that she was basically babysitting him because her parents said he was psychotic. The 18-year-old said that now she gets to speak with her siblings about once a month. They're in foster care, but she doesn't live with them or get to see them. When cross-examined by the defense called Jeanne the victim's mother, to which she responded, "Do not call her my mother. Her name is Jeanne Whitefeather. That is my request to you. She is not my mother." So during the prosecution's rebuttal, she was asked why she felt comfortable telling the truth now, and she said, "I know I won't go back to that." Then on January 21st, the 5th day of trial, the 12-year-old male survivor, one of the siblings, testified that they would call them all losers and that they did nothing but stand there and eat their sandwiches with their hands on their head all day, that they didn't get to drink anything unless they ate, and sometimes the water was shut off in the bathroom so they wouldn't drink from the faucet. He said that Donald would often beat his brother until he was begging for mercy, hitting him with the butt of a. He said that Jeanne said that they were not trusted alone, but he himself did not agree with that. He said it made him uncomfortable and afraid that they would have to open their eyes as they were bear sprayed. And he said that Jeanne once put a knife down his back and Donald once picked him up by the neck of his shirt and threw him over a burning sand pile. He said that he just wanted to move on from everything, saying, "I have hard times talking about my past. I want to get this over with so I can just move on." Then his sister, a 10-year-old female survivor, testified, and she stated that she would often stand for hours on end. She didn't know why that was a rule, but if she ever lowered her arm, she would either get beaten or wouldn't get meals. She said that the kids would even have to take turns cleaning their clothes in plastic tote bins and sometimes with a hose. Now, the boy who was 14 in the shed and said to be transferred to a psychiatric facility, he did not testify, nor was he at this trial at all. So then it was Jeanne Whitefeather, the mother, who would take the stand. This was the first time she had spoken publicly since the arrest, and Jeanne denied all claims, saying that her kids were never locked up, that they had access to every room, they had keys, they could come and go as they wanted. She said that they never called them names, and they used the cameras to watch the kids to make them safe. She said that when they adopted these children, they were actually only going to adopt a newborn girl. The adoption agency insisted that they adopted the 4 siblings to keep them all together, which is something that they often do. Jeanne said that they agreed because they wanted to be parents. She said, "All I knew that the baby was when I got the phone call 22 hours old. I didn't know what race the baby was, and on the way to the hospital, I asked my husband, if this baby is available, I want to adopt this baby. It didn't matter to me. I wanted to be a mommy." Now, January 22nd, 6 days into the trial, Jeanne continued her testimony, saying that the texts sent from her phone were not sent by her, including one that said that her oldest son showed all the signs of being a useless black dude. She said that her oldest daughter had access to her phone at times. But the defense then asked her about texts back in May 2023 when she wrote to Donald, "Don, I can't live like this. Help now, something." Jeanne would explain that she was actually scared of the oldest boy at this time, and she and Donald were planning on living in separate houses to protect the other children until the oldest boy could get help. He would take the oldest 2, she would take the youngest 3. However, she said that they were getting help for him in West Virginia, which is why they moved there, but they were having issues transferring the health insurance out of state to get the boy into that hospital. She said that any time that she would talk about the children, call them monkeys, that was not about their race, that she would call even her white grandbabies that as well.
I'm his mommy. I mean, they can disown me, but I will never disown them. As far as I'm concerned, they're my children.
You love all your children.
I love all my children.
Jeanne also said that she had called CPS many times for help, calling their social worker 3 times, the main office once, receiving no response while in West Virginia. She said she wanted help with the oldest boy's mental issues and possible placement for him at a psychiatric facility, but this never occurred. And so overall, Jeanne said that she was a frustrated, overwhelmed parent who tried to get help for her teen son, that she ultimately distanced herself from him because she was scared of him, that he would often talk about hurting himself or someone else and they didn't know what to do. She said she only regretted making the oldest girl a babysitter for him and placing so much responsibility on her in the barn. Then a CPS worker named Sierra Rabel would testify. However, she was seen in handcuffs in an orange jumpsuit. She was actually arrested on unrelated charges of endangerment involving a firearm charge. However, she was called back in spring of 2023 to Donald and Jeanne's home when they first arrived in West Virginia. She visited in May, 2 months before the arrest. She tried to make contact twice within 48 hours, and then Donald called her back later that day. So when she arrived for this home visit, she was looking for present danger, and she found no issues during her visit and the interview with the children. She did a walkthrough of the house and found no evidence of neglect or abuse, so the case was actually assigned to another worker and it was to be followed up on. However, there was no follow-up in the following months, and that next social worker was actually fired when this was found.
You're going to want to interview them individually, which I did, and then I did that on their porch for privacy purposes in case there's any disclosures made. That way the parents aren't hearing of disclosures being made. At that time, there were no disclosures made to me, which would indicate a present danger, which is what you're going to look for during when you're on call, is a present danger.
Then 2 women took the stand who were friends with Jeanne back in Minnesota. They said that they had never had concerns about how the couple loved or cared for their children. Now, what the judge did not allow was testimony from one of these friends, who was Jody Nash, who also was a foster adoptive parent, who claimed that she and Jeanne often had similar issues with their foster adoptive children and would talk about that. This was not allowed in the court, and it makes you ponder why, because many of the mental health and illness issues of foster adoptive children have been known to be covered up by the foster care system, keeping it a secret from even those who are about to adopt them or take care of them, such as reactive attachment disorder, fetal alcohol syndrome, bipolar, schizophrenia, and even more behavioral and mental issues. So many families dealing with this have become vocal on the lack of help even when they are begging for it. On January 23rd, the 7th day of trial, Donald Lantz, the father, would testify, and he would say that he did not or force the labor on these children, that they were assigned chores to teach them responsibility and even earned allowances, that they had a key. He explained that back in 2020, the oldest boy was in counseling. He was found to be talking to himself a lot and having lots of hallucinations, but due to COVID, they switched to virtual. He said the hallucinations became more intense. He began to fight with his siblings, even punching the younger ones. And then in 2022, he turned 13, and due to Washington law, he was able to stop attending sessions if he wanted to. So by that October, Jeanne would actually be attacked by him with a piece of firewood when Donald was out of town. He would say this was because Jeanne was attacking him first. But Donald will tell Jeanne to call the police and place him into protective custody, and Jeanne did not want to. She wanted him to live with the family. But Donald said this incident greatly affected the family. It was like going off a cliff. He said that after that, the boy was admitted to several mental health hospitals, only to be released 72 hours later every single time. He said he felt like the family had been abandoned. He said that they moved to West Virginia to be closer to help for that boy, but that they did not handle any of these children differently because of their race, that they chose to adopt them because they loved them. So January 24th, 8 days into the trial, Donald was cross-examined by the prosecution, and he was asked about the footage of him hitting the oldest boy with the PVC pipe. And he said that the boy had been aggressive off screen and that he never intended to hurt him with it. He said he didn't even remember hitting him with the pipe. He said this was right after he had attacked Jeanne with the firewood. Psychologist Timothy Sarr for the defense claimed that the oldest boy did have an altercation with Jeanne that made her withdraw from the oldest 4 children, and that even some of the siblings called him scary, that there were many reports made that he had homicidal ideations. He reported that even CPS had reports that these 5 children could suffer from fetal alcohol syndrome due to their biological mother drinking while they were in the womb, and that the oldest boy in particular had several diagnoses such as fetal alcohol syndrome, failure to thrive, reactive attachment disorder, PTSD, major depressive disorder, disruptive mood dysregulation disorder, and eating disorders. A report from before their adoption stated that he was in constant need of supervision, and at a behavioral mental health hospital, he was reported to be irritable, intense, aggressive, and had explosive outbursts. The psychologist basically said that this boy could perceive things not as they are because of his illnesses, and that the parents were good parents but unable to meet this boy's significant mental health needs. However, on January 27th, the 9th day of trial, psychologist David Clayman for the prosecution testified. What he had to say was different than what anyone really expected. Clayman said that the eldest boy had many symptoms. Some were scary and may suggest psychosis, but he said that the incidents that the family were referring to were embellished. However, he also said at the time of the arrest, the boy's symptoms were at its worst and that he should have been in residential treatment. However, there were no beds available for this boy even out of state. He admitted that this is a universal issue. But he said that the boy was getting worse due to how he was treated in his parents' care, that he really needed someone to hug him and be there for him. Though even with this psychologist for the prosecution seemingly not knowing all that much about RAD, it didn't take away the evidence of neglect reflect in the rest of this trial. The problem I'm pointing out here is that there is no real solution to RAD, and no one wants to research it or expose what is really happening to these foster children's brains, which we will get more into in a moment. January 28th, 10 days into the trial, the closing statements were made, and the prosecution said,
I want to remind you, that defendant Whitefeather and defendant Lantz made a bet when they chose to move to Sissonville, West Virginia. They bet that people of West Virginia would not care if they mistreated their black children right out in front of the world. I ask you to prove them wrong.
The defense said,
All of this bad conduct that we've been hearing for 2 weeks has to be because of their race. Because of poor parenting or mental illness issues or handling mental issues poorly. It has to be because of the race. Now again, not saying we're not down to counts 13 and 19 yet, but that's what you have to believe beyond a reasonable doubt.
January 29th, 11 days later, finally the trial came to an end. Donald Lantz and Jeanne Whitefeather were found guilty after 8 hours of deliberation. Now, this was a split verdict, so Jeanne was found guilty on all 19 counts of child neglect, trafficking, forced labor, and civil rights violations. But Donald was convicted on 12 out of 16 counts, as he had 3 fewer counts of child than Jeanne due to her using the bear spray on the children. So Jeanne now faces 215 years in jail, while Donald faces 75 years. They were both said to show little emotion when this was given, and they will be sentenced on March 19th of 2025. But this is said to be the first time that human charges were actually charged in West Virginia.
It's really hard for an adult to take the stand and testify against a stranger. I can't imagine the courage it took for a child to take the stand and testify against someone who, at one point in their life, they considered a parent.
When Mr. Lantz testified, he communicated through his verbal and his nonverbal cues that it made clear to the jury that he had a good relationship with the children, and race never really came in his mind when making any decisions.
We take a lot of this personally. You know, this is our community, and these are the children of our community. And so if we're not going to fight for them, then who will?
Now, this case should be eye-opening to many about the horrors of the foster system as well as adoption, and CPS has failure after failure. This case is a combination of lack of resources, of failure of the CPS, of mental illness, of inability, lack of knowledge on parenting those with mental illness and prior trauma, and so much trauma all around. The continued ignorance and cover-ups about the effects of the biological parents, not to mention the effects of the separation of attachment during foster care, and the trauma that these children are left with needs to be shouted from the rooftops. RAD, which the oldest was diagnosed with, is the name for these symptoms, often diagnosed during foster care prior to these children being adopted. Yet adoptive parents are most of the time kept out of the loop, and when they finally realize what is happening, help is very difficult to receive. This in no way takes away what these parents did to these children, but it is a horrific element to this case that also needs to be spoken on. I believe if CPS was doing their job from the very beginning, if they were transparent with everything that was happening, the help that these children actually need, and were on top of their care and making sure that they were safe, that these children wouldn't have had to endure 5 years with these parents. CPS knows all this is happening to these children and feigns ignorance before ignoring the consequences happening to these children and the families they reside in. And in some cases like this one, ignores the evidence of further trauma happening to them. This is much deeper of a case than just evil parents, and my hope is that the realization of this starts to begin. So yeah, this case can easily just be thrown out there as, evil parents, but I hope that from this video you learned so much more and so many more layers to it that we could uncover together due to my past knowledge. about this whole incredibly messed up system. If you want to learn more, I will have a playlist down below of foster care and adoption horror stories. But yeah, this one was not easy for me to film, so thank you so much for listening. It really makes it worth it when you guys hear what I'm trying to say, and I can speak out for those who are in a system so silenced that it is unbearable. And so, yeah, I will leave you with that. Thank you so much for being here. Don't forget to speak up. Your voice is powerful enough, and I love you to absolute pieces. Okay.